Hello, everybody. My name is Capy, and this is the first installment of a new series called Redneck Revelations, and they are revelations brought to you from me. Okay, how do I hear about these revelations? Well, it was a first-hand account. Mikey came to me and said, "I summon you to the upper room at Heaven's Gate LLC." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The heavens." And I said, "Well, why did you say Heaven's Gate LLC? I thought it was the Pearly Gates." And he said, "Well, it was." And well, then I wanted to pursue a music career, you know? And so I recruited a man named Marshall Applewhite. And when he got there, he changed the name from Pearly Gates to Heaven's Gate LLC. Now, I know what you're thinking. It kind of sounds funny, kind of sounds like a business, but I can assure you it is not. LLC stands for listening, learning, and caring. Those aren't bad things. So, the first night that I was there in the upper room, we had a Q&A, and I asked Mikey a couple of questions that I was curious about. And I asked him about the beginning, and I said, "Mikey, was there really a word in the beginning?" And he laughed and said, "Where did you hear that from?" And I said, "The King James Bible." And he corrected me and he said, "No, you heard that from the King James Version of the Bible." And I said, "What's the difference?" He said, "The Bible was the Word of God. King James Version was his take on it, his spin, and he made a mess of it." And I said, "Well, okay, well, it's not the word." And he's like, "No." He's like, "Who was God using these words with?" I was like, "Nobody." He's like, "So there was no narrator, right?" "No." "Well, don't you need people to make a language with words?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, this is in the beginning. Ain't no people, ain't no words." Very confused I was, but then he let me know that it was the sound, and the sound was what was in the beginning, and the sound was with the Lord, the Maker. And you're thinking, okay, that's kind of cool. And I said, "Well, what made that sound?" Trying to, stump him. And he said, "Well, it was a synthesizer." And I said, "What?" And you get out of here. And he's like, "No, you would know, You know what the brown noise was?" And I said, "Yeah, it makes you poop on yourself." He said, "You know what the pink noise is?" I said, "Yeah, it makes you straight." And he said, "You know what that sound was that they played for the Somalian pirates that made them freeze up?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember that." And he said, "That sound, it does stuff to you." He's like, "You ever been to a concert when and stand in front of the speaker and the bass was going boom, boom? You felt it on you, didn't you? You felt it pushing on your chest." Synthesizer is a very powerful tool. And he wanted me to go spread that word. And that's what I'm doing here, okay? What gives me the ability to have been summoned by Mikey, okay? You might ask yourself that too. Well, he told me I was one of the 7 or 8 greatest synthesizer masters of all time. 7 or 8? Well, he didn't exactly say 7 or 8. He said 8, okay? But since I'm so humble, I say 7 or 8 because if you asked me, I would say there were 7 greatest masters in all of time, okay? But you ask Mikey or anybody else, they'd say 8 because they would include me. But I'm so humble. The most humble person you would ever meet, the most humble person you've ever had the honor of looking at, hearing talk, interacting with, whatever. You haven't imagined anybody more humble than me, okay? Mikey said, "I am the most humble," and I'm repeating, all these things are things that he said. I didn't say these things. I'm just repeating them, because humble people don't do that. I said, "Well, what about Gandhi?" He's like, "Man, you know that Gandhi had got malaria and took the pill?" And I was like, "What's wrong with that?" He's like, "Well, earlier his wife got it, and he said that he was up to the maker if she lived or not, and he didn't get her the cure and she died. But why is it any different from him?" I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Because Gandhi was a dick." And I said, "Whoa, okay." And then I said, "Well, what about Mother Teresa?" And he laughed and laughed. And he's like, "I'm not going to even go on that one. When you get back, you just go look her up." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." Well, because I was so humble, you know, and still today I'm just so humble, you know, I just let him talk the rest of the night. you know? So that's really all that I got of that story, okay? But I did find out from another being there, the creation story involved the synthesizer. See, in the beginning, this is what we were getting at, I guess. The maker, after a while, got bored being by himself. So first, he started to dream, and he dreamed whatever he wanted to. His imagination was the limit, okay? But after a while, that got boring. So instead of just like having these dreams and waking up when he got scared, he decided that he wasn't going to wake himself up. That the only thing that could wake him up was either death or some like crazy, time, or if he was starting to get bored of that scenario, okay? So he did that, and that was awesome. He did everything he wanted to. He flied, and he did crazy things, magic tricks, whatever. Whatever you would expect the maker would want to do. That's what he did. Well, that would get boring after a while, and so then he did all the same things, but he did it in intervals of what seemed to be 80 to 88.7 years. Except he didn't know he had fallen asleep. He had convinced himself that this wasn't a dream. And that's where we are today, he said. And I said, well, then where do the worlds come from? He said, well, in these dreams, he made a synthesizer. That's why I gave you that introduction earlier about how powerful the synthesizer was. And he played with the synthesizer at night in the upper room. And one day, the synthesizer realized that he had stopped making other creations, and he knew that the maker was all about making more love. The maker was called the love doctor at times, but it had been so long since he had made anything new because he had become content with jamming out with the synthesizer. So the synthesizer knew what it had to do, and in the most selfless act ever conceived by man, the synthesizer short-circuited itself and cast his consciousness and awareness throughout the cosmos that at the time wasn't existing. But as his consciousness spread, so did the universe. And this is where we got the first world. Most of the intelligence was trapped there, and people could fly and do super calculations with their head, and clairvoyant, and could do telepathy and telekinesis and all that stuff, Brilliant people. And then the boom echoed. Notice I said boom, okay? Some people said it could be the bang. Some people could have said it had been a boom, okay? I'm going with boom. But actually, it could have been either. You know why I say this? Because we've had astral projectors go back there, and lucid dreamers, and depending on where they were and what direction they were facing, depended on that's what decided the sound. If you were standing this way, a certain angle, you heard boom. If you were like this, you heard bang. And we get this from the synthesizer. Okay, the synthesizer had a couple of sounds on it. One of them, which we think that he was using when this happened, was called the Big Banger. And there was another sound called the Baby Boomer. This is where we get these terms from. You think we came up with these things. Nothing has been come up with. It was all here before we got here. So the second world is what we were from, We're smart, but we're not as smart as they were. The smartest person we have is not even compares to the most stupid person they had, Tons and tons of gap between them, okay? I don't have to explain much about the second world because, you live in it. If you need to know more, go seek some counseling, go read a book. The third world now was the third echo, and they were morons, Thinking about the shift from the first world to the second world, well, you got the same one to the third world, People thought babies came from storks. They got a stomach cramp, they went to the hospital, said, hey, I got a stomach cramp, and then this bird brought them a baby. Okay? They didn't know what masturbation was, They knew that they could put them in somebody else, and somebody else could get in them. But that feeling that they got, they didn't know they could do it themselves. Huh, yep. They were completely, there's just not even a word for it. They were so dumb, you know? So moving on, the third boom caused the concern for the maker, and he had to hit the kill switch on the amplifier. And if you play music and you got stuff going through there and you turn it off, it's gonna pop, it's gonna click. And so standing back from an outside perspective, what we would have heard was boom, 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 boom. We caught 4 on the floor. We get this term because when it happened, it was just kind of scattered on the floor like they had played Yahtzee and the dice had just fallen out like that. You know, there's 4 of them on the floor. And that's why it's called that. Now, the amazing thing about this is it created time, right? We didn't have time before this. The time came from the synthesizer. Now, the amazing thing is time doesn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination. But yet, not only did the synthesizer create it, it controls it. You ever change the tempo on a synthesizer? Changes the time. That's right. It's amazing. Amazing things can happen when you play with these things. I'm so glad that I went and talked to him, you know? I'm sure there is a lot more to this story that I am leaving out. Maybe I will make an addendum to fill in some gaps if I had any, but I don't think I did. Did I talk about how humble I was? I am the most humble person. Did I talk about the noises the synthesizer makes? And I think I did. Well, if you have any questions, if it's good enough, I'll post a video to explain it to you. But until then, my name is Capí, and this has been a Redneck Revelation.